All right, let's dive right in. So, Dean, good to have you. Where do you
Hey,
think
thanks for having
the
me.
the state of the cold email industry is heading, just based off of you having, I imagine, hundreds and hundreds of clients, hundreds of agencies that you talk to on a regular basis, and where do you think it was, um, let's say in 2024 versus now?
Well, I think it's getting harder in general. And
Hmm.
I think I've noticed a pattern, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, where I see the most successful people being of two different profiles.
Okay,
One being very small agency, probably charging a bit more with more custom service attached, and servicing
myself.
just a few clients, you know,
Yeah.
not a giant operation.
Hmm.
Then I see on the extreme other end, we can maybe call out like like the Knicks of the world, um, who are doing hundreds of clients, right, and are running a scaled operation.
Hmm.
And I think it's the most difficult for the people in the middle right now, because the people that have like 2 to 3 people helping out and maybe have like 20 to 30 clients seem to be like the people that are really feeling the pain the most. They're not totally optimized. Uh, they don't have everything automated in a certain respect. They still
Yeah.
are probably very involved in the business. And they're big enough to have serious costs,
Hmm.
but they're not so big that they've kind of transcended out of the operations in some way.
Yeah, where like
So
churn begins to hurt them. That's actually an interesting
yeah,
point. So basically, it kind of boils down to like technical people are winning at that point, right? Like small
yeah,
technical or large technical from like a super operationalized point of view versus like small technical. And we have so many different moving parts that
mm,
like good things are starting to happen. So I've been seeing this kind of trend of a lot of people talking about, omni channel being a must, which I personally disagree with, for the most
oh,
part, like
interesting.
95% disagree with. I'm wondering if
Okay.
you're seeing like a lot of people move that direction in your experience. And are you thinking of, as an infrastructure provider, how you can like better integrate with people that may be going omni-channel? Like, are things there extra service offerings that you can do that make that better?
That's all right. So there's a lot to unpack there. I am not as anti omnichannel, right? I came from the tech sales world, and so omnichannel is really where I came from. It's just that email was always a favorite channel because you could scale it up super easily, and you could hit way more people. And back in the day when you had 10, 11% reply rates on just about anything, it was an amazing way to fill your calendar if you didn't want to cold call. So unfortunately, now I think it's flipped, and people are going back to omnichannel more out of necessity because for certain businesses and certain offers, it's just tougher to get the predictable outcome from cold email the same way. And if that's the case, you kind of have two options, which is like, scale it up to the moon doesn't always work, or maybe that doesn't work for the TAM they've got. Or can I add other channels that might be slightly more predictable? And, throwing on cold calling, if you can get numbers, uh, it tends to be a little more predictable. Although you've got some of the same issues, the potential spam thing that comes up on the phone. I don't know about you, but I don't answer those either. So you've got to
Yeah.
play games now with your infrastructure on that side as well. You can't just use any dialer. You've got to really have a dialed in system as well.
100%. Yeah, my point of view as an agency owner is that multi-channel is really, really, really good, but I don't think agencies should look to be doing every channel because it complicates your service so much that I think you lose a lot of your value. I think being specialized is where you can create the most value. You can create a lot of automated systems, you can operationalize, you can become like a much higher level when it comes to email. Like a lot of the campaigns, I'm in the, small agency but do a lot kind of boat. And for me, like email is the perfect place to kind of silo yourself because you're in a position where the data that you find, the markets that you map, and the triggers that you're able to pull in can feed an omni-channel effort from the businesses you support. So like personally, like I moved towards supporting businesses, maybe 90% of my clientele in the, 20 to 100 million plus range. And they have SDRs, right? They don't
Yep.
need you to necessarily do everything, but if you can enable everything, you're in a pretty good spot. Whereas I think like pulling in cold calling, sure, it could be good, but you're dealing with a whole new set of infrastructures, a whole new set of data providers, and an entirely new skill set that you now have to train team members on. So I think it becomes like significantly more overhead and now you're also having to sell a bigger service. So
Yeah.
for me, I think you're playing a dangerous game basically by going to omni-channel, but we're looking at like
It depends.
LinkedIn as a
I think
potential add-on.
jack of all trades, master of none is a
Yeah.
fair critique. I also think that what people aren't realizing is that as cold email gets more difficult, it means that the value of someone that can do it at a high level is also going up at the same time. A couple of years ago, when it was still relatively easy, if you were calling on these businesses or trying to get business for a cold email agency, I think you would frequently hear something like, well, we've got outreach, we've got this covered. Our sales team's already, they're sending emails. It's fine, right?
Mhm.
Whereas I think today, almost any company that you talk to acknowledges that, yeah, email's not working right now for us, right?
Yeah.
And they know it's a problem. It's a done deal. And some companies have given up completely, and they say, hey, we're just pounding people on the phones, which is fine,
Yep.
right? And a natural instinct. But I think the businesses that you talk to, if you have a good story to tell about why you're different, why your approach is better, they're a lot more receptive because they're very aware of the problem.
Yeah.
More so than they might have been 2, 3, 4 years ago. So
Yeah, I completely agree. So how do you view like volume senders as the winning formula, or do you prefer like more boutique kind of sending systems as the winning formula? Like what's the data telling you personally? Because I imagine you just have a lot more access to what other people are doing than someone like
yeah, so
myself.
it's like the art versus science, right?
Yeah.
I think you sound like you have a much more artful approach, right? And then you've got some of these folks that are ramming 300,000 emails.
Yeah, some of my
You're just
best
going to get
clients,
something
man,
together.
like full transparency, some of my best clients are in industries most people I talk to wouldn't touch. Like I'm talking about total addressable markets of like 1,500 accounts in certain cases or 2,500 accounts. And we just hammer those accounts every 45 days in print meetings, and we're very happy. Um, yeah, totally different approach to what I hear
Well, I think
most people
low
that own
volume
agencies
is
do.
low volume is underappreciated. Like, and we'll get into deliverability stuff, but one of the trends that I've noticed for sure, and it's tough to pin down exactly what they're seeing, but for Google and Microsoft, and more so Microsoft, it does seem like they have some sort of capability to pattern recognize
Mhm.
when a campaign from a consistent set of senders is hitting their network in a fixed period of time. So if,
Okay.
for example, you are sending very low volume, relatively speaking, and anyone would notice this when you send a one-off email, right? Almost nobody has real deliverability issues unless they've already tanked their domain. You send a
Mhm.
one-off email to somebody, it tends to go through.
Mhm.
And then there's a certain level where that becomes more difficult. Well, if you're playing the game the way you described, you may very well be staying below whatever thresholds are in place to stop bulk senders from hitting the network after a certain point. And people have probably seen this if they've ever had a campaign that starts out great and then starts tapering off within a few days with no changes made, right? Now, obviously, spam complaints is a factor there too, but I think there's just fundamentally, a capability to pattern recognize, this is part of a broader campaign that's hitting our network.
So I've seen some stuff coming out around fingerprinting, like what you
Yeah.
just mentioned. Like how nuanced is this? Like I hear a lot of people talking about like if you're following like templated structures that you're even putting yourself in a situation where you're going to land in spam. Are you seeing this on your end in the data, or do you ascribe to that belief?
It's really anecdotal, so it's tough to pin down. And every example, you can find a counterexample that proves it
Okay.
wrong. So I would say in general, the less and there's also things. So we have to back up too and say Microsoft and Google seem to treat things very differently right now.
Yes. And we'll get into that
Yeah.
momentarily, I think. Yeah.
So in general, I would say we take more steps to make our emails look unique than we used to. And when I think about our scale mail customers that are seeing the most success, it tends to be the people that are not sending a consistent template at scale. It tends to be the people that are doing row by row dynamic copy creation, for example, in Clay, which has been
Like fully AI basically with
fully
like a set
AI.
number of like rough examples to work off of.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
You give it a couple of examples. Here's the sort of thing I'm trying to say. Here's some unique variables. And we'll probably get into this too, but the length of emails keeps shrinking. And I think it's a lot to ask AI to write a 3-paragraph email that actually comes out well, although it's getting better every day. But if you're asking it to write 40 words and you give it 4 or 5 variables as part of that, the amount of text you're actually asking it to write at that point is not that big, which means its ability to screw up is also not that big, because you're really constraining the output a lot. And so most of the time when I ask people, about AI generated copy, they have a negative reaction, but they're thinking about a really, a full email, and they're thinking about these blog post emails that ChatGPT will write if you let it. But if you're doing this in Clay and you're really telling it, hey, it's got to be under 50 words. I need these variables in here. It should start with this. It should end with something like this. You're really not giving it a lot of room to screw up. And that tends to work out.
I'm seeing something similar, to be honest. And just a quick shout on like something valuable that people might like on that note is running your kind of copy generation outside of Clay to an N8N instance attached to something like 19AI or OpenRouter can often reduce the costs of the calls that you're making significantly. Running natively through Clay for some reason or another, or natively through a Claude API for some reason or another, ends up being far, far more expensive than these people that have set up their own cloud networks of these models and run them through there. 19AI, definitely would recommend checking it out. You can even get like free usage to a significant amount, like $50 a month of free usage.
Yeah, I actually do the same thing. So it's funny you say that. We use OpenRouter.
OpenRouter as well, yeah.
And if you're going to buy Clay, I always tell people don't even bother unless you get the 349 plan where you get the HTTP access. So you can hit any API. You hit OpenRouter and you pull back AI any way you want. You can hit the reasoning models if you want to spit out a crazy account research thing. And I think the other thing too is people tend to think, oh, I'm going to use AI like once. And the reality is, for most of the teams that I see that are doing this at a high level, they've got like 6 or 7 steps that are generating different variables before they get to any sort of writing step.
Yeah, I think in my like Clay wrapped, 90+% of my calls were all Claygent calls. To some degree or another. I think really like Clay is to automate some things. Sure, you can automate things better outside of Clay, I think. But realistically, for me, Clay is Claygent, and Clay is a place to store all my leads. And then like a few, like, their monitorings are nice to have. Their native LinkedIn integrations are nice to have when I don't want to go through the hoop of going to Sales Navigator and scraping it. Just get like a small sample size there. But yeah, I think that's a great point. Some of the best campaigns personally that we're running is just hyper segmentation, perplexity research, deep research through to Claude, learning to integrate Claude MCP as well, Jordan Crawford style. If anyone hasn't checked that stuff out, definitely check out his YouTube channel, by the way, for that. And then honestly, zero spin tax. On the point of spin tax, before we kind of dive into the differences between Google and Outlook, which I think are super important, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this, because the whole reason I actually started using Scaled Mail, Dean, was your webinar with Christian from Outbound Code. Your kind of breakdown of the differences between Google and Outlook, I was like, dude, I want this guy managing my infrastructure. Like, this guy absolutely knows what he's talking about. This is sick. Spin tax. Do you think the trade-off for grammatical correctness in significant spin tax usage is worth it for lists, let's say, under 2,000 contacts? And twofold, would you be better off just having those AI permutations doing it for you in a grammatically correct way, even though it comes at the cost of a little bit more AI usage? What's your take there? Because I have my opinion.
So I think the concept of spin tax is more important than like the way people are executing it. So a lot of people are doing what everyone has done, right? You'd feed in, okay, here's the text of my email. Here's the spin tax format for the sequencer I'm using. Give me a bunch of variations, in brackets, right? The problem, as you outlined, is a lot of times you get stuff back that doesn't work in every permutation, and you can ask it, make sure every version works but the reality is it's imperfect.
Yeah.
So I think you got to back up and just, what is the point, right? Do we believe that it's likely that the inbox systems can recognize, the broad strokes of a cold email or similar emails hitting their infrastructure in a certain time frame? Somewhat plausible. I've seen enough evidence to think that something like that's going on. So how do you break the pattern interrupt, right? If you're not spin taxing enough, or if you're not doing enough variation, then obviously you run a greater risk of, quote unquote, a campaign being flagged, right? Copy fatigue, this sort of thing. So when I say I still believe in spin tax, what I really mean is I believe in variation by emails and not sending a bunch of emails that are the same text or 85% plus the same. So we've moved almost entirely to the AI generated copy, but with the idea in mind that that's checking the box, quote unquote, for spin tax, right? Meaning we're trying to introduce variation. And the one thing that I think about more for as far as controlling for variation too is anybody that's used AI, right? If you give it a relatively similar prompt, you get a relatively similar output most of the time. So a good way to counteract that is to have different angles on a campaign. And when you get to that, writing step effectively, you're not necessarily giving the exact same prompt to 5,000 contacts. You've got 3 or 4 variations on whatever that generated copy should look like and whatever variables feed into it. And that way you're kind of sending like an, version A, B, C, and D out the door. And that introduces now a whole lot more variation because you've got AI written copy, 1-to-1, and maybe 3 or 4 base prompts that you're using versus one. If you're doing that, then you have checked the box on spin tax. And in my mind, you don't actually need to worry as much anymore about, doing the brackets and doing the whole thing. The other piece is, again, as emails get shorter, which is the overall trend, if you're including, company name normalized, if you're including any sort of variable that you've web scraped that's unique to them in the email text, all of that is unique words, right? That's not going to be consistent. So the more variables you introduce, the less likely that it looks really similar, word for word, row by row. So that I guess speaks to the importance of trying to include more research and more personalization things that you can include, because it helps on the spin tax front, not just on the personalization and relevance front.
100%. So the only pushback I would give there, I think maybe I'm wrong, but just anecdotally from a fingerprinting point of view, we've honestly run the same copy to about 10,000 contacts now, and it's just such a successful campaign, like 40 to 50% plus positive reply rate, and even negative replies are usually friendly. I haven't seen any dip, like zero dip. That's across beautiful. 10,000, like 10,000 contacts, 10,000 sends. Do you think that a big factor is just how happy people are to receive the email? Do you think that Google's taking fingerprinting into account, not just from this is the same email again and again, but they have some nuance to how they assess whether or not the same email is a good or bad thing?
I don't think it's being done at the email level. I think it's probably more likely it's being done at the domain reputation level, meaning, okay, I just think that if you're getting less spam complaints because you're sending better emails and you're getting more replies, which is a positive signal, and less bounces, et cetera, because you're doing your homework, then that is just a massive driver, I think, of the overall performance of campaigns and mailboxes over time. So if you do all of the right things and you have a good offer, then you can make these last for a long time. Because the other thing I've seen is, I could watch somebody do everything right, but if it's an offer that I just know is going to be tough, if you're cold emailing, chief information security officers, for a cybersecurity offering, I already know you could do everything perfectly, and it's highly likely that those mailboxes are going to blow up very fast. It's just because they're not receptive, right? They don't want to get cold emailed. They hate salespeople, and you're walking into a trap basically. So, that's more of an element here than I think people realize too. Is we could do everything right on our end, but at the end of the day, the mismatch. There's got to be a match between the demand and the supply of the offer too. If they don't want to hear from you, it doesn't really matter if you do everything right.
100% agree. I think relevance is like the biggest thing. Hence why we've moved towards like really, really deep segmentation. Like the example I like to bring up is just like there's like, I don't know, 15, maybe 20,000 print companies, maybe 1.2 million agriculture companies. And for a client we're working with right now, like we went down to the level of nuance of like classifying the specific equipment that they're using at these print companies where possible. And we dropped down to like 1,900 priority companies from 15,000. And then on the agriculture side from 1.2 million initially, right? Down to like keyword search, of course, down to like 12,000. And then from 12,000 down to just 865 best fit accounts. And those campaigns rip because you're able to say something that's just a unique problem to them or a unique pain that the actual problem is causing. You know what I mean? There's always like a problem and then the pain it causes. And I think that's where the biggest and best campaigns come from, is understanding that nuance and segmenting out for it. That said, I'd like to get into like Outlook versus Google. And I'd, instead of going to like a more broad kind of discussion on the topic, I'd love to get like super specific on things that I think are immediately actionable for people. So let's like do a Google versus Outlook kind of step by step, like copy length as a starting point. Is there a difference between the copy length you should send to Google versus sending to Outlook? And maybe prior to that, let's go, does it matter what type of inbox you send to each of these from?
Okay, this is a good question. We have people doing ESP matching and not doing ESP matching on scaled mail. What I would say is, and we can maybe retread some of that stuff that I discussed in the other webinar with Christian's group, but the fundamental difference is, or the belief is, I do believe that if you send Google to Google at a high level, or you send Outlook to Outlook at a high level, you will outperform in network if everything works out. But there's big air quotes, which is why I personally do not advocate for ESP matching right now, because Microsoft just has there's way more barriers that are invisible that can mess up your experiment and make you read into things that aren't there. For example, the outbound spam filter that Microsoft has on their inboxes. If you get blocked by that filter, the email does not send. You do not get a bounce. You don't get replies. You don't get anything. It's just silence, right? And if you line that up on the Google side, if you're sending from a Google inbox, right, like that isn't even a remote possibility. They don't do that. They just send you to spam, but they don't not send the email. So just based on like that, it's very hard to have an apples to apples discussion, right? Around like, do they outperform in network? So that's one big piece. The other big piece that you got to think about is, okay, you've got the outbound filter on Microsoft, right? When you're sending, and then obviously there's on the receiving side, if you send to Google, for example, you got to get through their spam filter. If you're going from Microsoft to Google, Google into Microsoft, you're hitting that spam filter once on the way in, right? But you're not hitting it on the way out. So, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there's so many different variables that affect, Google to Microsoft.
You're basically saying ESP matching is just a gamble at the end of the day. Like try it, don't try it.
I think it's too hard to run a good experiment for you to read too much into it. And I think the better move is to diversify and try to focus on the things that are more controllable. It's very easy to figure out if you're being blocked by the MS outbound filter, right? But other than that, there's a whole bunch of factors that could affect the outcome of a campaign and inboxing rates. And I just don't know if that's worth the mental energy that I've seen people put into it.
We're in huge agreements on this, huge agreements. I think I was pretty obsessive over things like this for a little while. And then I realized that I should just go back to focusing on making the very best campaign I can and putting all my effort into systems that enable that. For example, like Trigify. Just having that software in my stack is going to generate so many positive replies, whether or not like the meeting rate from a campaign like that is super duper high or not. It's a good thing to have in addition to what you're already doing, because all of those good conversations are just enabling you to deliver to the rest of your contact list much more effectively. And in that same note, we have conversations with 95% of negative replies.
Mhm.
We'll send memes back, try to get a laugh. Like we have
Yeah.
a huge focus on just humor with people that are not interested in the offer. And I think those little intangibles go a long way as well. But
Well,
to kind of
actually, a really fun
refocus,
strategy that I haven't heard a lot about, but a reply is a generally positive signal as far as these domain reps are tracking, right? They assume rightly that you don't reply to something low value. Now, obviously, people
Mhm.
say unsubscribe, what have you, but the real problem is when people click the "this is spam" button. If they reply, it actually comes back as a positive signal. If that's all they did, so bounces negative, replies positive. There's kind of an assortment of things that are considered,
Mhm.
um, and we can discuss, but like Google and Microsoft care about these things um, differently or emphasize different points. I tend to think, for example, right now that Google has somewhat like their own in-house version of a domain reputation, which makes sense because they have indexed the entire internet. They know all the domains. They know everybody's site
Yeah,
traffic.
when you
That's,
brought this up on the Christian call, I was like, this is so facts. Like it just makes sense. Like it's so obvious that they would have something like this, you know?
yeah, and it
But
also makes sense why they're easier to inbox on right now, but why like their updates make they're harder almost to figure out what's going on in some ways because I think it's homegrown.
Mhm.
Whereas I think Microsoft actually farms it out to the spam houses of the world and things like that. We're running some experiments earlier today where we found some very interesting info that makes me think that like spam house scoring may have an outsized impact on what Microsoft decides to do with an email, which is kind of interesting. Um,
Interesting.
yeah. So,
Interesting.
and honestly, for the way they build things, it makes sense that they would farm it out. As much as I'd like to think that they've integrated OpenAI into their whole thing, it's just not
Mm,
very Microsoft to
it's
do
not.
that.
That's very
So,
true.
yeah,
Yeah, slow to adapt kind of thing. To
exactly.
kind of reel it back into like the very like actionable points.
Yeah.
So copy length. Are you seeing a difference in the way length affects email deliverability to Google versus Outlook?
For Google, it seems much less sensitive to it. So I think we run into a lot of scenarios where somebody says something to the effect of, I have this great campaign. It's working on Google, but it won't work to Outlook. And
Hmm.
I have to unfortunately break to them that like the Terminator filter that Microsoft has does not care that their email works. It just doesn't like it, right? It's sorry. It decided it's spam. There's no appeals court. You're done.
Hmm.
So what I would usually say is it's really a question of like whether you want to create two campaigns or create one campaign, like for efficiency's sake.
Yeah.
So for efficiency's sake, I would cater to Microsoft and send the same campaign to Google because it's going to inbox to Google probably.
Yep.
Uh, the reverse is not true. You could have a campaign inboxing to Google that will not inbox to Microsoft. So if I was trying to be hyper efficient, I'd cater to Microsoft and send the same thing to Google. If I was trying to optimize for results, I would probably say it might make sense to come up with a campaign for Google recipients that's lengthier, maybe a little more along the lines of like sales best practices and trying to get the best response possible, optimizing for that. And then on the Microsoft side, I would really optimize to get past the spam filter and honestly try to backload a lot of the selling, meaning like let's just get a reply going and let's worry about selling them on the next email and the call and whatever the follow-up plan is. And those are two separate campaigns with a separate action plan. If you have the bandwidth to do that, I think that's probably your best bet.
I completely agree. Completely agree. So yeah, on our end, for the most part, we'll start off, especially during initial tests, just catering to Outlook, and then we'll experiment with longer copy to Google. Our goal is just find fit as fast as possible, so we don't want to be adjusting multiple campaigns before we know which messaging seems to resonate. Um, that's kind of our protocol. So, in terms of like an absolute length, like what are you seeing as like a good length to be sending, or a good benchmark of I need to be under this length for sending to Outlook? And one question I actually have that might be interesting is a lot of people talk about the word length of their copy. When it comes to
Yeah.
your word length, do you think the absolute word length is more important than the number of total characters? Or are they looking at characters as a factor as well? I've
Uh,
always thought of
I
this.
would be guessing on character versus word. I'll tell you what
Okay.
I do right now, which is I I advise people to try to keep it under 50. My prompts in Clay right now, and Leonardo at Beanstalk, who is on our team, are
Mhm.
asking the AI to give us essentially a 30-word response,
Mhm.
35 words. And when you include some variables, like that's not a lot of words. So,
Not at all.
you
It's
know,
2
you
lines
say,
max, depending
yeah,
on
it's
the length of the
2 to 3
lines.
lines maximum. And so you're really, but at the same time, if you go back to cold email templates that have gone viral in the past, a lot of the best stuff are those one liners, right? The question,
Mhm.
because it's easy for them to read, it's easy for them to understand, and it's easy for them to respond. If you check all three of those boxes, to be honest, you're sending a great cold email because nobody wants to read your essay, or some smaller portion of people are going to read the 3 paragraphs,
Mhm.
right? If they can glance and know what the offer is, that's pretty effective just by itself, assuming that it's to the right person and it's the right message. So we're doing a lot of stuff like we've got a client that does accounting services, essentially like a reconciliation software. And they're really able to help people that do e-com sales or sell via Stripe, essentially, through an online checkout. Because for whatever reason on the back end, it turns things into a mess for accounting purposes. So all we really have to say is, hey, it looks like you're using Stripe. Have you run into this specific problem? Question mark. That's the whole email. And that gets conversations going. Like, yes. And if it's to the right person, yes, we have had that problem, or no, we haven't had that problem. I mean, it's a pretty binary reply, and then their sales team can pick it up from there and be prescriptive. So
One of
I
my
know,
best campaigns right
yeah,
now is that exact formula. And then step 2 is just expanding on like the potential challenges that could be faced with a case study to
exactly.
enable that to be like something trustworthy. Basically, I literally just think curiosity and then how do you close them on the trust factor is
Right.
basically the 2 pieces I think about with every campaign. But yeah, totally agree. I've been sending like much shorter emails lately, and um, typically I won't see anything dip below like a 2% reply rate, which will kind of feed me into the next conversation I want to have. Um, but typically in the 4% range for any sort of more successful campaign, all the way up to 10%, depending on how segmented it is. But how do you play into like testing like email guard? Like if you were to do an inbox placement test, which to be
Mhm.
honest, I mostly play off of reply rates. Like that's
Yeah.
my kind of golden rule. But if you were to like 2 days ago, I had a placement test I ran. I'm inboxing on one campaign 100% effectively, quote unquote, to
Hmm.
Outlook and 0% to Google. What are the
Okay.
different steps you would take based off of that data when looking at, a 0% from Google versus a 0% from Outlook? Like how can people take action on that advice depending on the ESP?
So from what I've seen at Scaled Mail, and we're seeing a lot of accounts, and we have a lot of people asking us when they have deliverability problems, which gives us a lot of insight into what isn't working for
For
sure.
sure.
The quietest people I know are ripping it, and then we've always got the people that are running into issues who we talk to the most. But
Yeah.
what I tend to think right now is,
Which is
first of
why we
all,
haven't spoke before today, right?
yeah, exactly. I haven't heard much from you, which is great. Um, so usually our we have an order of operations for support. If somebody complains about deliverability, we have kind of the checklist. Like from our perspective, can we eliminate mailboxes as the cause, or can we isolate mailboxes or domains as the cause? Because that's the simplest fix, right? Hey, there's some reputation damage here. You got 2 options: warm them up if you've got the patience, or swap them out for fresh domains and let's start again after some warm up, right?
Hmm.
Um, so we want to isolate, is that the problem or is it something else, as fast as possible. There's a few Microsoft specific issues as well that I won't get into, but things like tenant blocks, unusual behavior, essentially, um, being assigned to a low IP reputation pool at Microsoft, which is just bad luck, and they do it a lot. But we can fix that. They just have to basically get support to intervene and put you in a better pool, essentially. So if we eliminate all of those issues, then it usually comes down to something approximating I'm failing the Microsoft outbound copy filter, right? What I've noticed is we order an inbox placement test. That's usually our step one. Like, let's see what's going on with a vanilla email. Because if you're 0 out of 10, well, then tends to be reputational damage. What's more common would be something like Microsoft not inboxing, Google is. In my mind, because Google tends to be more domain reputation sensitive, that can be fixed with copy changes for the most part, or the IP change that I mentioned. Because if you're in a low reputation Microsoft IP pool, they care a lot about IPs, right? So private sequencers, this sort of stuff. Like, if you focus in there, you can fix
and
the
just
problem.
to clarify, like one of your claim to fames is that you'll handle that IP change on behalf of your clients, right?
Yes, there's basically there's obviously a lot of Microsoft resellers out there, as everybody knows, and I think the number one differentiator for us, at least, is support. Hopefully, you can validate that as well. And
look, by the way, guys, I have absolutely no affiliation with Scaled Mail whatsoever. Maybe down the road, but for now, absolutely no affiliation. They're our sole Azure infrastructure provider, and they do a fantastic job. So if you need infrastructure, I think Dean is one of the best there is.
Hey, I appreciate that a lot. And I just think with Microsoft, there's enough weird little things that can go wrong on Microsoft that you really need a strong support team behind you, because
I agree.
A lot of these things require manual intervention to fix. And just throwing people inboxes and saying good luck is not the end of the road by any stretch, right? You're basically playing the numbers, but 1/3 of the time there's going to be an issue and it needs to be dealt with. And I think a lot of providers, unfortunately, like put that on the user and say, oh, this is your problem now. Your campaigns suck. But there's other things that can be wrong besides that. So, little aside there. But okay, going back to your placement test. We run the placement test. If it's Microsoft not inboxing, but Google's okay, I tend to think that that's a fixable problem, whether it's with copy adjustments, adjustments to the inboxes themselves at Microsoft, if they're Microsoft inboxes, but generally something that can be dealt with. If Google's not inboxing, it tends to either be we didn't warm up, right? So like the people that want to send day one, like the domain reputation hit happens too quickly and they stop inboxing very quickly. They send some sort of generic campaign or it's not well received. They didn't want to wait, and now they're tanking on Google. Unfortunately, if you're not inboxing on a placement test on Google, 9 times out of 10, I'm telling people either just warm up for a month or swap domains. Like that.
Interesting, an entire month, eh?
At least, because warming up from a bad position is longer than starting at 0 and going into positive territory, right? So if you spin up a fresh domain, you're already on the shit list with these guys unless you're under, over 30 days anyway. Like that's the maximum risk, which makes sense because that's what everybody's doing. But beyond that, if you start fresh and you're doing warm up, you're giving positive signal. If you don't, it's only negative for the most part, right? There's no like site traffic going on to these domains. You have none of the other signals that they could look at. So all they see is bounces, spam complaints, a website that's been up for 2 seconds. You don't have a lot helping you, at least with warm up.
It's funny. I spoke with, I had dinner with Aviv from Panda Match. I don't know if you've spoke with him before, but he still still helps out this guy who's like this mythical being. I'm not sure if he's mentioned this to you, but this guy literally, like Aviv was saying that he has at minimum like 80,000 inboxes on one smart lead, and he has multiple smart leads on behalf of like multiple clientele. And he just blasts like 1 million emails, and he does 0 warm up, and he just whips up domains once a month and just blasts on behalf of people and rips results. And when I hear stories like that, like it makes like so much more true your opinion of there's people that are going the boutique route, and then there's people that are just like, whatever, man, if it's a 0.05% reply rate, I don't care.
Yeah, if you make
I'm just gonna
the numerator big enough,
this.
yeah, if the number's big enough, at some point it just works out, right?
Yeah, it's crazy to me.
If you can make that work, it's definitely a viable strategy.
Yeah.
And that's why you're seeing people go that way too. And frankly, it's good for scaled mail, because I think what's happening is a lot more people are getting pushed into having to go the volume play to make cold email pencil. And so our goal obviously is to make the cost reasonable enough that that is a viable option. And it's not, hey, I gotta go.
That's so interesting to me. I'm personally doing less volume than I've ever done. Like full transparency, on the average client, I would say like on average we're sending about 12 to 15,000 emails a month, not contacts, emails a month per client. There's like a few outliers that have like expansive total addressable markets where we'll like scale out like really hard, but for the most part that's kind of where we're at. And I find as long as you're doing warm calling, it's just really simple to book meetings, like even off of just like lead magnet based approaches rather than hard call to actions. I don't know if you've experienced anything similar.
I think you're running at a very high level. And as much as I'd like to think that every operation is operating at that level, the answer is they're not. And so, it's a gamble for them, right? Like if they're wrong, they're just going to churn every client.
That's true. That's true. We charge pretty sizable retainers that let us go like a lot deeper. Like we'll spend, $500 on a list of 2,000 contacts to make it perfect. You know what I mean? And like, I think a lot of it could just be that I'm in like a little bit of an echo chamber, which tends to happen, I think, like, especially on Twitter. Like the main people I communicate with and bounce ideas off of are like the Buzz Boys, Buzz Lead, and also Lead Caesars. And I think they have like like almost identical mentality when it comes to cold email. So that could be a big aspect as to why. But
you have two options, right? In sales in general, it's increase the volume or increase your conversion rate. One is a lot easier than the other.
Or give up.
Or give up. But one's a lot easier, right? It's why every sales manager in the world, they're like, do more, get better. But getting better is always a little bit tougher to systematize, right?
Yeah, I think AI is just making it so much easier, like so much easier, as long as you're like becoming savvy, for sure, right? But I'd like to kind of dig into, you've mentioned warming, obviously. Like I think warming is absolutely vital. There was like a small pocket of time where people thought like warming was a bad idea, but I think it was mostly smart lead specific at that time. What's your take on like warming protocols? And I know you have some opinions on how they differ between Outlook and Google as a result of the way they think about inbox versus like domain kind of considerations. Do you want to dig into that a bit?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's non-negotiable at this point.
I agree.
And I think it's mostly because the tolerance for negative signal has gone down from both providers. Meaning, if you're getting dinged on too many bounces or too many spam complaints, the level of rope that you used to have is just a lot less, right? Like the tolerance they have is approaching zero effectively. So warm-up's going to do a lot to at least throw some positive signal out in the universe about these domains that you're sending from. Now, I think a lot of people get hung up on mailbox reputation, which I don't think is actually relevant. Like it's 99% the domain that they sit on, right? If you think about, for example, we're doing 49 inboxes on Microsoft. It doesn't really make sense that if you sent, 5 emails in a day and then you get, if you got a complaint that, you're suddenly at, 25% complaint rate, like that's not how it works. It's going to be the aggregate of everything going on in that domain. So all those mailboxes and all that activity rolled up into one. Let's see. I want to back up to your question and make sure I'm answering it. So we were talking about domain reputation.
Just direct differentiators between the warm-up protocol that you would use on an Outlook inbox versus Google inbox.
So
and I would say, like, let's be specific. Let's say Azure infrastructure as opposed to generic Outlook.
Yeah, because the reality is they're really not that different. My protocol is basically the same. It's just that if you have 49 or 99 inboxes on an Azure instance, you can't send the same amount of emails. So we found the sweet spot to be 1.5 to 2x your cold volume to be the ideal warm-up volume. So if you think about it, essentially 1/3 cold, 2/3 warm-up, right? Mm-hmm. The idea is very basic, which is bury the negative signal in more positive signal.
Yes.
Is this like a magical formula? No, but it makes sense to me, that 2/3 is a good number, versus half, for example, right? Half, well, if you're getting a lot of negative signal, you're not really burying it, right? It's just 50-50, 50 bad, 50 good. I like the idea of kind of pushing even more positive signal on top of this, what we know is going to be relatively negative signal activity, which is cold email. It's going to get complaints. It's going to get bounces, right? There's going to be a certain threshold of that negative stuff. So we want to try to bury it as much as we can. That's my philosophy. It seems to work. So obviously, if you're on an Azure setup and the recommended sending volume per day is 2 to 5 cold emails per day, then I would be setting the warm up to be 4 to 10 per day.
Perfect.
With some variation, obviously.
And in terms of warm up length, like where do you set your minimums on each of these infrastructures? Length of time before sending cold?
I think you've got to do 2 weeks. The reality is the longer, the better.
Yes.
Is the truth. And actually, I mean, we should get into age domains as well, because we're seeing some interesting information here around that. The age domain conversation is not for nothing, that they do make a big difference.
Make
but
a big
I think
difference.
the length of age where it truly matters is more than people want to think. So, yeah, meaning I think a 1 or 2 month aged domain, it's good. It'll help. Under 30 is the worst. Period.
Necessarily moving the needle tremendously.
Yeah, but I don't know how much you're moving the needle. I think when you get past like 3, 4, 5 years, that's where you're really starting to see a big pickup in inbox rates.
And those can be pretty darn expensive, depending on the domains you're getting, right?
They can.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So one of the things we're going to be looking at is, I'm sure everybody's looked at like the GoDaddy expired domain auctions, which I would always keep an eye on because you can pick up some stuff. I wouldn't overpay for these domains, like $500 or something. But if you can find a really old domain and pick it up for, $30-$40 instead of 10, I think that's a very worthwhile investment at this point, because it seems like those sail into the inbox. And unless you really ding the reputation, that reputation should, stay level if you're warming up and you're doing the right things and you don't, have some horrendous campaign that everybody clicks this is spam on. Like, they should last as well.
Interesting. I haven't played around with age domains too much yet, but anecdotally, what we're doing is we're basically viewing infrastructure as like redundancy is super duper important, like way more important than ever off the bat. And so we're basically trying to double it, double what we need for our first month so that we can bare minimum have half of our inboxes warming for a full 6 weeks. So 3 weeks minimum, and then a full 6 weeks on the other ones. And we're seeing like, it's almost like a match made in heaven. Usually it takes us anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to find a new offer that we've never run anything for before. So for reference, we work in really weird markets, so it's a bit different. I know some people walk into the first week and just start ripping. We work with a lot of people in like agriculture technology. It's a little bit of a different story, like people selling equipment. But yeah, like that 3 week mark hits, we've just found traction. And then we plug in new inboxes and they're just ready to like add fuel to the fire. And that's where we see like our 6% plus kind of reply rates versus our like more 3% average on the lower end.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Anybody that asks me, I'm like, if you've got the budget to do it, you should double up on your infrastructure and do like a group A, group B approach where group B is warming while group A is being used. And I would still do the 2 week warm up on the front end, but I think you're exactly right. A 6 week-ish time frame, and then taking the group A out of rotation, putting them on warm up only, tagging in the group B inboxes. That stuff really works. And that extended period of 6 weeks of warming really can help to counteract the negative signal that's accumulated from the cold campaigns. And it makes the inboxes last longer. So, it sounds like, oh, I'm paying double for infrastructure, but if they last 2 to 3 more months than they would have, you've more than made up for.
You're saving money in the long term. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like personally, 100%. I have some inboxes and domains running on them that are like 10 months old and still delivering very, very well for my personal brand. And That's just because like we're in a cadence where like half the inboxes just take breaks from sending and we just keep warming. Like we have
Yeah.
enough infrastructure. I think like that's where you're going to be most effective, where you don't have those weird kind of purchasing sequences or lulls in your sending, you know?
Yeah. The churn and
Which
burn
brings me
stuff
to a point.
really. Oh,
Hassan
yeah.
on
Go
our
ahead.
last conversation, Dean, mentioned that lulls in sending, I believe, or maybe this was off the record, may not have been the video, but um, he mentioned that lulls in your sending can impact your reputation almost just as dramatically, where you really do need to rewarm back up your sending and not just return to that old benchmark. Do you agree with this sentiment?
Yeah, I do, because I think, again, it boils down to signal, right?
Mhm.
If your only signal generated is from campaigns, which has a lot of negative attached to it, and again, there's no other activity going on with these domains, right? Let's be real. They're not hosting websites. There's no activity. There's no traffic. So you really need to maximize the positive signal that you can generate around these. So if you can leave warm up all the time on, they're always sending, they're always generating positive signals. Sometimes they generate negative signal when you turn them on for a campaign, but you have this kind of steady Eddie approach, right? If you don't want to look suspicious, don't do suspicious things, right? It's like, companies don't appear and disappear within 3 months in real life. But if I was sending a bunch of spam, that's exactly what I do. Well, Google and Microsoft are not. I mean, they're not filled with stupid people. It's not terribly difficult for them to figure out what's going on with churn and burn domain approaches, right?
100%.
So yeah,
It should be
I agree.
relatively rudimentary, right?
Yeah. Honestly, I think the main point is it looks cheaper in the short run to like send day one, to buy less infrastructure, to maximize it to the hilt. I'm going to send at the absolute maximum sending volume or even beyond. But in reality, it's much more expensive long term. You're going to churn and
Completely
burn.
agree.
You're going to have to buy infrastructure so much more often than the person that's doing it like you are. Group A, Group B, rotating in and out, warming up for long periods of time, taking a more cautious approach, maybe not sending at the absolute maximum.
Yeah,
But
we don't.
yeah,
We usually keep our reserve at 3 to 4
yeah,
per inbox. I think you consider the limit 5 per inbox, correct?
correct. But
Yeah.
2 and 3 works better than 4 and 5, generally
Yeah.
speaking, right?
Yeah. Of course. And yeah, so we try to keep things low. Like on our Google inboxes, we're usually like anywhere from 8 to 12 max. We'll
Yeah,
push it to 12 depending on how well the campaign's going. But yeah, for us, it's just all about like as many inboxes and domains as we can. And for any agency owners out there, like a big turning point for my agency was just charging a fat retainer. Like implement a large retainer so you can pay a lot of money to get good things for your business, good tools, good infrastructure, good onboarding flows, reinvest into automation, because I think we're in a turning point in the agency game where if you're not charging a big enough retainer to reinvest into your service offering every single month, people who are doing things manually are going to disappear. Like, I think with AI, the advent of AI and automation, the biggest agencies are going to eat the market. Like, the
yeah,
agency game did not used to be a winner takes all game, but I think increasingly it's going to become that. I don't
yeah.
know if you would agree.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think the people that are trying to eking by is not plausible anymore. It just isn't, right? If you're going to be small, you need to charge more to stay small comfortably, right?
Charge more, do more. Yeah.
Yeah, charge more, do more. And then on the even for the big guys, right? I mean, it's not that inexpensive to do these giant operations where you're sending hundreds of thousands of emails. They're having to charge more too. Again, I think that like that middle person that's trying to get that, 2K a month and make it work with the staff, that's going to get really tough for that to work in the future, I think. And even this pay per appointment stuff, I mean, I know people make it work, but at the low end especially, it's a really risky proposition because, and I'm sure you have the same conversation with prospects that want that. And I say, well, look, like if I'm running that shop, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and find all the offers I can sign because it's free. So I'm going to sign as many people as I can. I'm going to put the bare minimum to get everybody's campaigns up and running. And then I'm going to see which ones book meetings the easiest. And I'm going to put all my resources into maximizing those billings. And I'm not going to focus on the mediocre ones or the ones that look too difficult because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You know?
So
And so
yeah,
for
for
prospects that are
me in
looking
sales
for,
calls, it's just
yeah,
all the framing around almost the exact same thing, framing around it being a partnership, framing it around you want someone that can invest back into you, and then always pulling in that direct comparison to, you know, look, if you were to bring someone on board to do this, you would be investing more upfront capital to make the exact same thing happen. So why would you expect like a strictly performance-based company to come in and take on that risk from a business perspective, right?
no,
So
no,
yeah.
it's 100%. If you're making a finance analogy, right, the pay per appointment are playing the VC game, and the retainer people are playing the PE game.
Great way to put it. Great way to put
So
it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's fantastic. I like that. I've been targeting the M&A kind of sector a lot more. Have a meeting with a crazy company tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I
well,
think I'm going to have
let's
to
talk
use
about it
that
after.
analogy on the
Yeah,
meeting tomorrow.
we've done some work in that area, so we can chat
Yeah.
about it offline.
I think M&A is pretty easy to get results for. I've helped out some people with campaigns towards them. I've just never decided to dip my toes in the industry myself. But um, yeah, I moved deeply away from like, you know, working with agencies. I think number one, move away from working with agencies, and you're gonna have a lot better of a time being a cold email agency.
Yeah,
A lot more fun too. A lot more fun types of offers to dig into, and you can differentiate yourself more.
I mean,
That said,
one of our best offers ever was a photographer for real estate development. And
yeah,
she
you
did,
brought this up. You literally
yeah,
had to stop the campaigns, right? Because it was just too
yeah. She was
much.
like, I can't physically go to all these. Like, we need to stop. And
Dude, that's so cool.
it was amazing. But no one in the photography business for real estate is cold emailing at scale, so it worked great. I'm sure it's the
Yep.
same thing with the ag tech stuff that you're doing. If I was going to say anything to agency owners, it's like try to find unique offers that aren't played out. Don't be the
Yeah.
guy selling the Clavio flows to ecom, for the love of God. It's going to be a really hard road for you.
So my rule of thumb is target industries that have hard to find personas. That's
Mhm.
it. That's my only rule of thumb because all I want to be in a position of is I'm going to be willing to do more effort to find the right person to contact. And if I can put myself in that position, I think I'm already like beyond 80% of agencies, and then the rest is just how well I can do it, right?
Yeah, I think
So yeah, that's basically my rule of thumb. Like we had this M&A company that we put together like a rough flow for as like a proof of concept. We'll do these sometimes if the opportunity is big enough, and we uh, we were like, hey, like we can figure out which of these companies is a family-owned business for you, and that was the deal sealer. They found that their most success comes from their intimate process with family-owned businesses, as opposed to it being like this kind of robotic, cold kind of relationship. And that's what they've been built on. They've done over $12 billion in acquisitions over the last 20 years, and that was like the fundamental value proposition. And we're like, yeah, we can
tailor
definitely
made for Claygen.
yeah, we can figure that out for you, right? Like we can check a lot of different data sources. Claygen also, I think a lot of like Boolean search is really valuable for this type of stuff. I talk about this a lot. But yeah, there's two things I want to kind of dive into before we break off here, and you can add one more if you'd like. But a big question that a lot of people have is like, how do you deliver to enterprise? I have one opinion on this that's worked for me, but I'd love
Mhm.
to hear if there's non-hacker ways to deliver to enterprise from yourself.
Well, I actually think, based on what I've seen, at least for scaled mail and our infrastructure, that it is easier to inbox to these enterprises in many cases than it is to inbox to people using vanilla MS365 Outlook. Meaning they're probably sitting on MS365, but they've got Proofpoint or Mimecast or some other secure email gateway on top of their Microsoft, and that is
Mm-hmm.
really the spam filter you've got to worry about. In many cases, I'm seeing that those are actually easier to inbox to than your kind of root Microsoft. Right now, Microsoft's native filters are more difficult. They're
Interesting.
easily the strictest. So I guess what I would say is if you take and put into practice all the stuff we've already talked about, the short copy, the dynamic stuff, right? Making sure that you're introducing enough variation, you've got the right infrastructure, and obviously all the stuff that hopefully we didn't have to cover because it goes without saying, your DNS records are set up properly. You've got a good offer that people want to engage with. Then I think you're not going to have as terrible of a time as people act like. Now,
Okay.
you've got to be smart though about how many emails are going to one specific company in that campaign. Like you can't hit 30, 40 people at the same company and have it work out, because what those systems are really, really good at is seeing the same email hit their network in multiple spots. So you've got to pick, here's the 3 people I want to hit at Nike, and then that's it for this campaign. Like
I've heard this
don't
a
try
ton.
to hit 40.
And I think like cycling it like 30 days, like spreading out the campaign to like the larger institutions, like these 3 people, then these 3 people, then these 3 people, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing I'd add to that is like, I'm a big proponent for like personal email sending. I send to personal emails all the time. Like, and to be honest, Dean, I don't know if you've heard this from other people. That's where my best campaigns happen. Like those are where you get like the 15, 20% reply rate, like outlier campaigns. And I don't know the exact reason, because I really don't focus too much on the technicals of the person I'm sending to's infrastructure. I just aim for diversity and campaign quality. And I found I can literally go from sending to enterprise on work emails and have 1.5% reply rates straight to 9% by sending to personals to those exact same people. And I think the reason is that those aren't paying customers to Google and Outlook, and therefore the protections in place are lesser than. Hassan, to his death, disagrees with me on this from Email Bison, but my biggest pain point from joining Email Bison was that he wouldn't let me send to personal emails. He finally did, and if you look at my personal instance, it's always doing better than my work instance. So
you send
I'd love your opinion on that.
Right?
Pardon?
You send low volume overall.
I do send low volume, but like I'll send to 2,000. Like I'll do a 2,000 person campaign
I think that's
for personal
low.
emails.
That's low. That's why I think it works. Okay. That's why I think it's working.
Okay, interesting.
So I think that's one big thing, and I think the other big thing is, organizations have, especially at Microsoft, right? There's this concept of like the organization, right? And they're trying to stop phishing attacks. They're trying to stop spammers.
Yes,
right?
I was going to mention this as well. Yeah,
they're thinking about what's hitting that network, meaning that company's inbox, right, at any given time. And if it looks like a campaign, it's going to get categorized appropriately. I think when you're sending to gmail.com, you're literally a drop in the bucket to all of the Gmail users. Now, and you got to think too, like everybody sending a Nigerian print scam to 7 million people at once, which is how they do it. That's who they're worried about stopping, not, your, no offense, rinky dink email.
Exactly. No, I agree. Like this is why I try to communicate to people. Like, don't be afraid of sending to personals, especially like people think there's like a compliance issue. Dude, as far as I can tell, like as long as your topic is relevant to their work functions, you are in the clear. Like 100% in the clear. So yeah, like if you guys want to deliver to enterprise companies, and even some smaller companies, like my fiance works for a non-for-profit, and it's maybe like 35 employees at her domain, and they pay for a software to block incoming emails. Like they pay for extra protection. So like if you just want to circumvent like people paying to stop you from delivering, send to their personal email. If it's relevant, they're going to be happy they received it.
I think that's right. I think the other thing, we've been doing more of it, and I think it's going to make a comeback. Again, we're talking a lot to agency people, but I'm sure that's a lot of your audience anyway. If you know how to do cold email at a high level, and you can use Clay and these tools to personalize at a contact level, the world of direct mail is far behind a lot of the techniques that are being used in cold email. But, what would you do with 100% open rate effectively? Like, do you believe that you would get a great response? Because if so, it gets pretty easy to justify the $1 or $2 a send that you need to think about. You have all the capabilities. We've done a couple of direct mail campaigns out of Clay, and we're just, instead of an email, it's going to a CSV to get printed. And we've seen some pretty amazing results because, when it's a handwritten envelope with their name on it, they're opening it. That's not true for email, but it's true when it comes to their office.
Handwriting quick question?
No, we're not doing a quick question. We use a provider that does handwritten envelopes. So it looks like a wedding invite or something. Like it's going to get opened. It doesn't look like a bank
super sick
loan offer. So I think a lot of people are sleeping on that, but the post office is still a thing. So for now, at least. So,
Dude,
and
I
it's
honestly love
relatively
all
inexpensive.
Clay use cases that like involve non-email functions.
Yeah.
Like we run like Twitter agents through Clay, and then we'll have those same agents posting and sending DMs. So like we're just cycling that through Clay because it makes it so the data has like really easy overview, table view, so we can see like is the post bad or good, like very quickly and diagnose issues. Um, I think there's so many different functions like that that you can do really high level. I think I saw a LinkedIn post recently of a guy sending $500 champagne bottles, allocated like $25,000 in spend to send all these champagne bottles to prospects. And he reported back like within 3 months, it was like $300,000 in revenue, like hugely successful campaign. I
Yeah.
think do more of the things other people aren't willing to do.
Correct.
Spend more on AI. Like if you
Yes.
figure out a campaign and you have this data point that's expensive to find, just find it, do it, try it.
100%. One thing I do want to touch on before we wrap, and actually, because you're a scale mail user, I'd want to tell you anyway. So we're going to be bringing in a couple more things into the platform that I think are needed.
Great.
So one is we get a lot of questions about age domains. We discussed some of the sources that you can go, right? The GoDaddy auctions, etc. But what I think we're going to see more of is people at least wanting to age their own, right? Because one of the problems is I could go and buy a bunch of generics and try to flip them to people, but I don't know what names you're going to be okay with, right? It's too subjective. So what we're going to start doing is you already now have the ability to buy domains through Scaled Mail as part of the onboarding. So if you buy a package, you can buy through us, which is just DN simple, or you can bring your own. But now you're going to have the option to just buy domains without buying inboxes, with the idea that you can put them on the shelf with us and age them. And we're going to have a little age column in your domain screen so that you'll be able to see the age of these domains that are sitting.
Nice.
And at a certain point, you might say, okay, these are 6 months aged. Now I want to use them. Right. Or I want to start warming them up for a while, at some point. So I think right now it's going to be, you can just buy them and you can see the age. I want to bring in a notification system as well. So you can say, hey, let me know when these get to a year. Let me know when these get to 3 or 6 months. And then I'll buy inboxes. That way you're not paying for inboxes while you don't need them. You're just trying to get the thing a little older. So
yeah.
Wanted to kind of talk about that. And then I think we should give a coupon code to your people here if they made it this far in the video.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I can even throw it like somewhere deeper in the video, like 20 minutes, just in case there's that drop off. But I think, yeah, that's a great idea. What are you thinking?
I think I'll do a 10% off for anybody that uses the code Mitchell10, which I'll give to you, and you can put it in the video a little bit earlier, so they don't have to watch the whatever we're at now, hour plus.
Perfect. Yeah, hour and 7 minutes. So yeah, that's perfect. Is there anywhere you want people to find you?
Scaledmail.com. If you want help with managed outbound, beanstalkconsulting.co is our agency. So we still run an agency. We still stay pretty close to the metal because I think, if you get out of this game for even a month, you're so far behind. It's tough to come back.
Completely agree. I completely agree. That's why you never go the info route. Always go building a SaaS on top of the agency. Never info.
Well, actually, speaking of info, we are working on a cold email course that will be free for all Scale Mail users. That's
the way to do info. Perfect. Free courses. Love it. Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Dean. Honestly, like I learned quite a few things just from chatting with you as well, which means that it's going to be super valuable to basically anyone, 99% of people. So thanks for doing this.
Hey, anytime.
Take care. All right.